Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra, in English then, you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we are going to talk about is called G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it. All the interesting facts about this movie. In today's video, I'm going to tell you. I am also going to give you all the information on which OT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production filming, post-production budget box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, star cast, actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, so let's start the video. G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra is a 2009 American military science fiction action film based on the G.I. Joe toy line. It is the first installment in the G.I. Joe film series. Directed by Sommers from a screenplay by Stuart, Beattie, David Elliott, and Paul Lovett, the film features an ensemble cast based on the various characters of the toy line. The story follows two American soldiers, Duke and Ripcord, who join the G.I. Joe team after being attacked by Military Armaments Research Syndicate as troops. After leaked drafts of the script were criticized by fans, Larry Hama, writer of the comic book series G.I. Joe: A Real American Hero, was hired as creative consultant, and rewrites were made. Filming took place in Downey, California, and Prague's Barrandov Studios, and 6 companies handled the visual effects. G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra premiered at the Andrews Air Force Base on July 31, 2009, and was released in the United States on August 7th by Paramount Pictures, following an extensive marketing campaign focused on the mid-American public. Despite mostly negative reviews from critics, the film grossed $302.5 million worldwide against a $175 million budget, making it a box office success. A sequel titled G.I. Joe: Retaliation was released in 2013. Plot: Weapons Master James McCullen has created a nanotech-based weapon, nanobots that can devour any non-organic materials. His company, MRS, sells 4 warheads to NATO, and American soldiers Duke and Ripcord are tasked to deliver the warheads. En route, their convoy is ambushed by the Baroness, whom Duke recognizes to be his ex-fiancée Anna Lewis. Duke before they are rescued by G.I. Joe operatives, Scarlet, Snake Eyes, Breaker, and Heavy Duty. They take the warheads to the pit, G.I. Joe's command center in Egypt, and meets the G.I. Joe leader, General Hawk. Hawk takes command of the warheads and relieves Duke and Ripcord, only to be convinced to let them join his group, after Duke reveals that he knows the Baroness. McCullen is revealed to be using the same nanotechnology to build an army of soldiers with the aid of the Doctor, planning on using the warheads to cause worldwide panic and bring about a new world order. Using a tracking device, McCullen locates the G.I. Joe base and sends Storm Shadow and the Baroness to retrieve the warheads with assistance from Zartan. Storm Shadow and the Baroness retrieve the warheads and take them to Baron Decobray, the Baroness's husband, for him to weaponize in his particle accelerator. After he reluctantly does this, Decobray is killed by Storm Shadow. Making their way to Paris, the Joes pursue the Baroness and Storm Shadow, but they launch one of the missiles. The missile hits the Eiffel Tower, destroying it and some of the surrounding area before Duke hits the kill switch. He is captured and taken to McCullen's base under the Arctic. The Joes locate the secret base and fly there, as McCullen loads the 3 remaining warheads onto missiles, which are aimed for Beijing, Moscow, and Washington, D.C. After Snake Eyes takes out 1 missile, Ripcord destroys the remaining 2 by using a stolen MRS prototype Night Raven jet, while Scarlet, Breaker, and Snake Eyes infiltrate the base. Snake Eyes duels and prevails over Storm Shadow. Duke learns that McCullen's employer, the Doctor, is actually Rex Lewis, Anna's brother, believed to have been killed by a mistimed airstrike during a mission led by Duke. Rex had encountered Dr. Mindbender in the bunker and was marveled by the nanomite technology, but was caught in the bombing, which disfigured him. After freeing Duke, the Baroness is subdued as the Doctor reveals he has implanted her with nanomites, which has put her under his control. Attempting to kill Duke using a flamethrower, McCullen ends up being burned when Duke shoots the weapon and causes it to explode, so Rex and McCullen flee to an escape vessel. Duke and the Baroness pursue him while the Joes fall back after Rex activates the base's self-destruct sequence, which involves blowing the ice cap to create blocks of ice, which then nearly crush the Joes. Rex assumes the identity of the commander, having healed McCullen's burned face with nanomites, transforming his skin into a silver-like substance, and naming him Destro, which places McCullen under the commander's control. They are captured by G.I. Joe soon after. On the supercarrier USS Flag, the Baroness is placed in protective custody until they can remove the nanomites from her body. Meanwhile, Zartan, having had his physical appearance altered by nanomites, infiltrates the White House during the missile crisis and assumes the identity of the President of the United States, thus completing a part of McCullen's plan to rule the world. Cast: Joe. Channing Tatum as Conrad Hauser, the lead soldier. Lorenzo di Bonaventura was originally interested in casting Mark Wahlberg and when the script was rewritten into a G.I. Joe origin story, the studio offered the role to Tatum. Tatum had played a soldier in Stop Loss, an anti-war film, and originally wanted no part in G.I. Joe, which he felt glorified war. The actor later detailed that he wound up in the film due to a contractual obligation with Paramount. Given Tatum signed a 3-picture deal following Coach Carter. Tatum was a fan of the G.I. Joe franchise growing up and expressed interest in playing Snake Eyes, despite Paramount wanting him for Duke. Dennis Quaid as General Clayton Abernathy, the Joe's commanding officer. Quaid described Hawk as a cross between Chuck Yeager and Saget Rock and maybe a naive Hugh Hefner. Quaid's son convinced him to take on the part, and the filmmakers enjoyed working with him so much, Stuart Beattie wrote 10 to 15 more scenes for the character. He filmed all his scenes within the first 2 months of production. Adewale Akinnuoye-Agbaje as Herschel Dalton, heavy duty, an ordnance expert and field commander of the team. Common was offered the role of Heavy Duty's cousin Roadblock, although Bonaventura previously indicated Heavy Duty was being used in that character's stead. Stuart Beattie ultimately chose to have Heavy Duty instead of Roadblock. Rachel Nichols as Shauna M. O'Hara. Scarlett graduated from college at age 12 and became the team's intelligence expert. Having left school so early, she does not understand men's attraction to her. Nichols was the first choice for the role. Nichols had dyed her blonde hair red, Scarlett's hair color, for her role in Star Trek, which she filmed before G.I. Joe. She burned herself filming an action sequence with Sienna Miller. Marlon Wayans as Wallace Weems, a pilot with a romantic interest in Scarlett. A fan of the franchise, Wayans was cast on the strength of his performance in Requiem for a Dream. Bonaventura said that the film showed Wayans could be serious as well as funny. Ray Park as Snake Eyes, a mysterious ninja commando who took a vow of silence, a departure from the character's traditional difficulty in speaking due to grievous vocal wounds, a close member of the Arashikage ninja clan, and Storm Shadow's rival. Park specifically practiced wushu for the role, as well as studying the character's comic book poses. Park was already familiar with the character, but knew very little of the surrounding saga of G.I. Joe vs. Cobra. So he read the comics to further understand the character. He was nervous about wearing the mask, which covered his entire head quite tightly, so he requested to practice wearing it at home. He found the full costume, including the visor, very heavy to wear and akin to a rubber band. He had to put effort into moving in it. Leo Howard as young Snake Eyes, Saeed Tegmoui, the team's communications specialist and hacker. He is seen chewing gum during the Battle of Paris in an homage to the original character. Karolina Kurkova as Courtney Kriegirl, Hawk's aide-de-camp. Kurkova described going from her modeling career to making such a film as an amazing experience, but said she was upset about not taking part in any action sequences. Brendan Fraser uncredited cameo as Jeffrey Stone IV, Sergeant Stone. Fraser was reportedly going to play Gung Ho, but was instead later revealed to be playing Sergeant Stone. According to the director's commentary on the DVD, Fraser begged director Stephen Sommers to be in the movie, making it his 4th collaboration with Sommers after the Mummy franchise. Cobra, Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Rexford G. Rex Lewis, the Dr. Cobra commander. The Baroness's brother, a former soldier who was thought to have been killed during a mission led by Duke. Instead, he became the disfigured head scientist of Military Armament Research Syndicate, MRS. USA Today reported that Gordon-Levitt would play multiple roles. Gordon-Levitt wore prosthetic makeup under a mask that was redesigned from the comics because the crew found it too reminiscent of the Ku Klux Klan. Upon seeing concept art of the character, Gordon-Levitt signed on because, I was like, I get to be that? You're going to make that makeup in real life and stick it on me? Cool, let me do it. That's a once-in-lifetime opportunity. Gordon-Levitt is a friend of Tatum, and they co-starred in Stop Loss and Havoc. His casting provided extra incentive for Tatum to join the film. Gordon-Levitt described his vocal performance as being half reminiscent of Chris Latta's voice for the 1980s animated series, but also half his own ideas, because he felt rendering it fully would sound ridiculous. Christopher Eccleston as James McCullen, a weapons designer and the founder of MRS, who is the main villain in the early part of the film. Irish actor David Murray was originally cast as Destro, but was forced to drop out due to visa issues. Murray was later cast as an ancestor of James McCullen in a flashback scene. Sienna Miller as Anna Lewis, Anastasia de Cobra, the Baroness, the sister of Cobra commander and a spy. Years earlier, the Baroness was going to marry Duke, but he left her at the altar due to his guilt over her brother's apparent death. Miller auditioned for the part because it did not involve having a breakdown or addicted to heroin or dying at the end, something that was just maybe really great fun and that people went to see and actually just had a great time seeing. Miller prepared with 4 months of weight training, boxing sessions, and learned to fire live ammunition. She sprained her wrist after slipping on a rubber bullet while filming a fight scene with Rachel Nichols. Lee Bung-hun as Thomas Arashikage, Snake Eyes' rival. Both were close members of the Arashikage ninja clan. Lee was unfamiliar with G.I. Joe because the franchise is unknown in South Korea, but Sommers and Bonaventura told him that it was not necessary to watch the animated series to prepare for the role. Lee was attracted to Storm Shadow's dual personality, which he stated has huge pride and honor. Brandon Suhu as young Storm Shadow, Arnold Vosloo as Zartan, a disguise expert who serves Destro. After playing Imhotep in the Mummy franchise, this is Vosloo's third collaboration with Stephen Sommers. Kevin J. O'Connor cameo as Dr. Mindbender, a scientist in McCullen's employ who developed the nanomite technology 34. After playing Igor in Van Helsing, this is O'Connor's fourth collaboration with Stephen Sommers. Other characters: Jonathan Pryce as the President, Gregory Fitoussi as Daniel de Cobra, the Baron, the husband of the Baroness, Gerald Okamura as the Hardmaster, Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow's Ninja Master. Production development. In 1994, Larry Kasanoff and his production company, Threshold Entertainment, held the rights to produce a live-action G.I. Joe film with Warner Bros. As the distributor. Instead, they chose to concentrate the company's efforts upon its Mortal Kombat films. As late as 1999, there had been rumors that a film from Threshold Entertainment was still a possibility, but that project was never developed. In 2003, Lorenzo de Bonaventura was interested in making a film about advanced military technology. Hasbro's Brian Goldner called him and suggested to base the film on the G.I. Joe toy line. Goldner and de Bonaventura worked together before, creating toy lines for films de Bonaventura had produced as CEO of Warner Bros. Goldner and de Bonaventura spent 3 months working out a story and chose Michael B. Gordon as screenwriter because they liked his script for 300. De Bonaventura wanted to depict the origin story of certain characters and introduced the new character of Rex to allow an exploration of Duke. Rex's name came from Hasbro. Beforehand, Don Murphy was interested in filming the property, but when the Iraq War broke out, he considered the subject matter inappropriate and chose to develop Transformers, another Hasbro toy line, instead. De Bonaventura related what the Joes stand for and what Duke stands for specifically in the movie is something that I'd like to think a worldwide audience might connect with. By February 2005, Paul Lovett and David Elliott, who wrote Bonaventura's 4 Brothers, were rewriting Gordon's draft. In their script, the Rex character is corrupted and mutated into the Cobra commander, whom Destro needs to lead an army of super soldiers. Skip Woods was rewriting the script by March 2007, and he added the Alex Mann character from the British Action Man toy line. Bonaventura explained, "Unfortunately, our president, George W. Bush, has put us in a position internationally where it would be very difficult to release a movie called G.I. Joe. To add one character to the mix is sort of a fun thing to do." His script was leaked online by El Mayimbe of Latino Review, who revealed Woods had dropped the Cobra organization in favor of the Naja Ryan, a crooked CIA agent. In this draft, Scarlet is married to Action Man but still has feelings for Duke and is killed by the Baroness. Snake Eyes speaks, but his vocal cords are slashed during the story, rendering him mute. Mayimbe suggested Stuart Beattie rewrite the script. 43. Fan response to the film following the script review was negative. Bonaventura promised with subsequent rewrites, "I'm hoping we're going to get it right this time." He admitted he had problems with Cobra, concurring with an interviewer, "They were probably the stupidest evil organization out there as depicted in the cartoon." Hasbro promised they would write Cobra back into the script. In August 2007, Paramount Pictures hired Stephen Sommers to direct the film after his presentation to CEO Brad Gray, and production president Brad Weston was well received. 46. Sommers had been inspired to explore the G.I. Joe universe after visiting Hasbro's headquarters in Rhode Island. The project had found the momentum based on the success of Transformers, which Bonaventura produced with Murphy. Sommers partly signed on to direct because the concept reminded him of James Bond, and he described an underwater battle in the story as a tribute to Thunderball. Stuart Beattie was hired to write a new script for Sommers' film, and G.I. Joe comic and file card writer Larry Hama was hired as creative consultant. Hama helped them change story elements that fans would have disliked and made it closer to the comics, ultimately deciding fans would enjoy the script. He persuaded them to drop a comic scene at the film's end where Snake Eyes speaks. To speed up production before the 2007-2008 Writers Guild of America strike, John Lee Hancock, Brian Koppelman, and David Levian also assisted in writing various scenes. Goldner said their inspiration was generally Hama's comics, and not the cartoon. Sommers said had it not been for the rich backstory in the franchise, the film would have fallen behind schedule because of the strike. After Variety had reported that the film recharacterizes G.I. Joe as being a Brussels-based outfit, whose name stands for Global Integrated Joint Operating Entity, there were reports of fan outrage over Paramount's alleged attempt to change the origin of G.I. Joe. Team Hasbro responded on its G.I. Joe site that it was not changing what the G.I. Joe brand is about, and the name will always be synonymous with bravery and heroism. Instead, it would be a modern telling of the G.I. Joe vs. Cobra storyline, based out of the pit as they were throughout the 1980s comic book series. Filming and design. Filming began on February 11, 2008, in Los Angeles, California. The Downey soundstage was chosen as Paramount needed a large stage to get production underway as soon as possible. The first 2 levels of the pit were built there, to complement the rest of the building, which would be done with special effects. 60. Downey also housed Destro's MRS base in the Arctic, his legitimate weapons factory in an ex-Soviet state, as well as filming various submarines' interiors, including a Shark, submersible high-speed attack and reconnaissance craft, crewed by 2 G.I. Joes. Filming in the Czech Republic's Barrandov studios began in May. The crew took over sections of the Old Town in Prague. While filming in the city on April 26th, people were injured when a bus and several cars collided with a 4-wheel drive vehicle that appeared to have braking problems. The emergency services confirmed those taken to hospital had minor injuries. Filming wrapped after a month in Prague. Additional second unit filming took place in Paris, Egypt, Tokyo, the Arctic, and underwater. Sommers felt almost 100% of the technology in the film would actually become available within 10 to 20 years, citing the various books and magazines about developing weapons that he loved reading. For example, Sommers said he believed invisibility was impossible, but the virtual invisibility provided by camouflage camera that projects the background of a soldier's body upon its front allowed him to include it. The production designers modeled the interior of Destro's private submarine on a handily paged jet stream. Sommers said the bulky immobile accelerator suits, which Beattie said had enabled them to write a car chase where one guy's not even in a car, had been tough on the actors and were likely to have their roles reduced in potential sequels. Critics have compared the suits to that of NFL Superpro, a comic book character jointly licensed by the NFL and Marvel Comics and resembling an armored football player. Bonaventura predicted that the aid offered by the United States Armed Forces to the film's development would be limited since much of the hardware depicted in the film is fictional. The filmmakers were denied use of MRAP armored vehicles at the start of filming, as the Defense Department had just prioritized their deployment on combat operations. However, they were later permitted to film the vehicles at the National Training Center at Fort Irwin Military Reservation. Some commentators reviewing previews and promotional art from the film have noted superficial resemblances between it and the action film parody Team America World Police. 6 visual effects companies worked in the rise of Cobra, the most prominent being Digital Domain, which handled the Paris action sequences and the opening convoy sequence. For the Eiffel Tower destruction, special software was written for depicting how the crumbling metal works. To create the digital Eiffel Tower, the technicians had access to the original building plans and built a digital model so complex that it could not fit in a single computer file. For the nanomites, designers used 2 proprietary software applications for their depiction, one made by Digital Domain and another by Prime Focus VFX, which also created tools to generate 3D cloud and sky environments for the aerial scenes. Many scenarios were almost fully developed by computer-generated imagery, such as the landing platform of the pit, the Cobra ice caverns, and the final underwater battle. As for the sound effects themselves, only one is considered popular and isn't instantly recognizable. When the pulse cannon fires upon the main submarine during the polar assault, the sound of a programmed de-resolution from the 1982 cult movie classic Tron can be heard. Music. Further information. G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra soundtrack. The film is scored by Alan Silvestri, who reunited with director Stephen Sommers to record his score with a 90-piece ensemble of the Hollywood Studio Symphony at the scoring stages at Sony and Fox. A soundtrack album of the score was released by Vare Saraband Records on August 4, 2009. Marketing. The film's actors were scanned for Hasbro's toy line, 19, which began in July 2009 with the release of 3 3-inch tall action figures. The Rise of Cobra toy line also includes 12-inch figures and vehicles, including the first playset based on the pit in the franchise's history. Electronic Arts developed a video game sequel to the film, also titled G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra. IDW Publishing released a 4-issue prequel written by Chuck Dixon. Each issue focuses on Duke, Destro, the Baroness, and Snake Eyes, respectively. It began publication in March 2009. The weekly film adaptation was written by Denton J. Tipton and drawn by Casey Maloney. The film's universe continued in a limited series about Snake Eyes later in 2009. Ray Park enjoyed playing the character and approached writer Kevin Van Hook and artist S.L. Gallant with the idea of a comic further exploring his incarnation of the character. As part of the movie launch campaign, more than 300 12-inch parachute-equipped G.I. Joe action figures were dropped from a 42-story Kansas City hotel roof and soared across 500 feet to the ground at the 16th Annual International G.I. Joe Convention. For viral marketing, black helicopters with G.I. Joe written on them flew over American beaches. Tie-ins were made with Symantec, 7-Eleven, 84, and Burger King. Paramount's vice chairman Rob Moore claimed the movie was prioritized for mid-Americans, and thus marketing was more focused on cities such as Kansas City and Columbus. In Europe, the marketing was focused on action sequences set in Paris, Egypt, and Tokyo, and emphasizes that G.I. Joe is an international team of elite operatives, and not about beefy guys on steroids who all met each other in the Vietnam War. G.I. Joe: The Invasion of Cobra Island. In 2009, RM Productions Limited was contracted by Paramount Pictures Corp. to produce a viral marketing campaign for G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra. This resulted in the creation of G.I. Joe, The Invasion of Cobra Island, a two-part animated web video which eventually went viral. The plot has G.I. Joe called in to stop Cobra when they develop a secret bioweapon on their hidden island base. It was done in the style of Team America, World Police, and Thunderbirds, using a mix of vintage Hasbro G.I. Joe vehicles of the 1980s and the newly produced 25th anniversary G.I. Joe figures. The characters were animated using custom puppetry techniques, while their faces and other special effects were done using 3D animation software packages. Release: theatrical. The film was first screened in the U.S. on July 31, 2009 at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland. The premiere was at Hollywood's Grauman's Chinese Theater on August 7, 2009, and on the following day, G.I. Joe started playing at 4,007 theaters in the U.S., along with 35 other markets. Home media. G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra was released on November 3, 2009, on Blu-ray and DVD in regular and 2-disc editions, and later as a book, 94, and as a video game. Both disc editions include audio commentary by Stephen Sommers and Bob Ducsay, and 2 making-of featurettes, with the second disc of the special edition holding a digital copy of the film. The film opened at number 1 at the DVD sales chart, making $40.9 million from 2,538,000 DVD units in the first week of its release. The film sold more than 3.8 million discs, 500,000 of them on Blu-ray, during its first week. The film was released on Ultra HD Blu-ray on July 20, 2021, to coincide with the theatrical release of Snake Eyes. Reception. Box office. During the opening weekend, August 7, 2009, G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra opened at number 1 of the North American box office with an estimated $54.7 million. It earned an additional $44 million internationally during the same weekend. In the following week, the film opened in 14 more territories and continued atop the international box office with $26 million. This made it the third Hasbro film to reach number 1 at the box office after Transformers and Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. The film grossed $150 million in the United States and $152.3 million internationally for a worldwide gross of $302.5 million against a production budget of $175 million. It is the 22nd highest-grossing film of 2009 and the 10th highest-grossing film of 2009 to gross $300 million worldwide, behind Star Trek, Monsters vs. Aliens, X-Men Origins Wolverine, Terminator Salvation, Fast and Furious, A Christmas Carol, Inglourious Basterds, The Proposal, and The Blind Side. Critical response. Paramount decided to not screen the film for print critics before its release and wanted to focus on internet critics. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 33%, based on 171 reviews, with an average rating of 4.60/10. The website's critics' consensus reads, "While fans of the Hasbro toy franchise may revel in a bit of nostalgia, G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra is largely a cartoonish, over-the-top action fest propelled by silly writing, inconsistent visual effects, and merely passable performances." On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 32 out of 100, based on 25 critics, indicating generally unfavorable reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B+ on an A+ to F scale. One of the many complaints made by fans was that the film did not relate to the G.I. Joe franchise. G4TV.com stated that the studio actually went out of their way to butcher the G.I. Joe mythos in favor of derivative storyline devices. They cited the Baroness, who was changed from an East European noble in the comics to Duke's brainwashed ex-girlfriend in the film. Dan Jolin of Empire magazine commented that it was Bond without the style and Team America without the belly laughs. The Daily Telegraph reviewer said, "The taint of cruddiness extends everywhere in this joyless stinker." James Berardinelli said the characters were as plastic as the toys that inspired them and considered Tatum wooden, and that his character was more animated in sequences when he is rendered by special effects than when being portrayed by Tatum. Roger Ebert described that there is never any clear sense in the action of where anything is in relation to anything else. Chuck Wilson of The Village Voice criticized the dialogue and described the underwater battle as absurdly overproduced, momentarily diverting, and then instantly forgettable. Manola Dargis of the New York Times considered the plot at once elemental and incomprehensible, and Peter Travers of Rolling Stone thought that, despite the high budget, the special effects look shockingly crappy. The Eiffel Tower appears to be destroyed by some green slime left over from the Ghostbusters films. Reviewers also criticized the film for the scientific impossibility of sinking ocean ice. Matthew Leyland from Total Film called it a throwaway blast of solid, stupid fun and gave it 3 out of 5 stars, particularly praising Joseph Gordon-Levitt's performance as the treacherous Cobra commander. Sister publication SFX called the film dumb and dopey, with plenty of bumpy bits, and that G.I. Joe has a genuine cliffhanger charm, especially when the last act becomes a whole string of pulp plot twists. The ending screams, "To be continued, we could do worse." Finally awarding the score of 3 stars out of 5. Christopher Monfett of IGN also gave the film a positive review, saying, "This is an adult's interpretation of a childhood phenomenon, and if you're willing to give it a shot, one suspects that you'll find yourself entertained enough to give your best. Yo, Joe!" He gave the film 3.5 out of 5 stars. Betsy Sharkey of the Los Angeles Times criticized the excessive flashbacks, but praised the action scenes and design and considered that Marlon Wayans steals the show. Dan Coys of the Washington Post, describing it as loudest, flashiest, silliest, and longest blockbuster in a summer full of long, silly, flashy, loud blockbusters, thought it was as polished and entertaining as warmongering toy commercials get. Cast members Eccleston, Tatum, and Miller have been critical of the film in the years since its release. Eccleston stated, "Working on something like G.I. Joe was horrendous. I just wanted to cut my throat every day," and admitted he regretted taking the role primarily for the financial reward. Tatum, in an interview with Howard Stern, said he hated the film, revealing he was pushed into doing the film as to fulfill a 3-picture deal he had signed with Paramount. "The script wasn't any good," said Tatum, but expressed relief that it could have been worse. Miller, in an interview with Forbes, stated, "I'm sorry." She said, "As soon as I mentioned, I had seen not only the first movie but also the companion piece." "You saw both of them? Wait, there was a second one? Well, they didn't bring me back. There are roles in those kinds of things that would be fun and things that I think my kid would like. I just haven't been offered that yet. I would be open to it. I know what I can do now, and I know what I can't do," she mused. "I shouldn't have played a villain in a comic book because I'm just not that villainous or tall or strong. I am internally, of course, but I couldn't fire a gun without blinking. I'm not a particularly physically threatening presence. The whole thing was a bit of a disaster from start to finish." Accolades. Tatum won the Teen Choice Award for Choice Movie Actor, Action for his performance as Duke, and the film also received 3 other Teen Choice Award nominations: Choice Movie, Action, Choice Movie Actress, Action for Sienna Miller, and Choice Movie, Villain for Joseph Gordon-Levitt. The film was also nominated for 6 Razzies, including Worst Picture, Worst Director, Worst Screenplay, Worst Supporting Actor for Marlon Wayans, and Worst Prequel, Remake, Ripoff, or Sequel, with Sienna Miller winning the Razzie for Worst Supporting Actress at the 30th Golden Raspberry Awards, becoming the biggest stump for 2010. In other media, inspired by the movie, The Ballad of G.I. Joe was released in 2009 on the website Funny or Die. Written by Daniel Strange and Kevin Umbricht, and featuring celebrities such as Olivia Wilde, Zach Galifianakis, Alexis Bledel, Henry Rollins, and Vinnie Jones, the video short parodies several characters from G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, by showing what they do in their spare time. Sequel. Main article, G.I. Joe Retaliation. A sequel, G.I. Joe Retaliation, was released on March 28, 2013, directed by John Chu. Movie review, G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra. I am a hardcore G.I. Joe fan, but only Real American Hero and its continuations. As such, I am very critical of some of the liberties taken with the characters in this movie, but in the end, I was pretty satisfied with the movie. Read on. Rise of Cobra is interesting in that Cobra and its commander don't really exist for most of the movie. Instead, Destro and his MRS organization are the heavies, with some support from the beautiful Baroness Anastasia de Cobra, the ninja Storm Shadow, and Zartan, the Master of Disguise. Thus, this movie chronicles the rise of Cobra Commander and his terrorist organization determined to rule the world. It is the near future. The original Marvel comic as written by Larry Hama was based on actual military tactics, history, and machines, while enhanced with lots of futuristic touches such as laser cannons and jump jet packs. This movie updates the franchise for the new millennium. New technology here include nanomites, accelerator suits, and other gadgets. Yet even so, updated versions of classic vehicles such as the Night Raven jet and VAM Jeeps appear. Basically, just as G.I. Joe was futuristic for the 80s, this is futuristic for the now. The acting here is bad bordering on terrible. This Channing Tatum guy can't act at all. Dennis Quaid pours the cheese whiz on every line of dialogue that General Hawk delivers. Marlon Wayans, Ripcord, Rachel Nichols, Scarlett, and Sienna Miller, Baroness, are passable. The heavies tend to get the best roles and the best actors. Arnold Vosloo, Zartan, steals every scene he is in, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt is surprisingly serpentine as Cobra Commander. Christopher Eccleston is good as the Scottish arms dealer Destro, just menacing enough, while also dignified and cool. Also, it's nice to see Jonathan Pryce in anything. The direction, by that hack Stephen Sommers, The Mummy, is god-awful. He throws awkward flashback scenes in frequently with no real sense of flow. Check out The Watchmen for how to effectively do a flashback. His action scenes are pretty damn exciting, but you get a sense that a better director could have provided some more fluidity. I'll give you an example. The climactic sword fight between Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow is decent, and Ray Park, of course, is the best at what he does. However, when you compare what he does here as Snake Eyes to what he did as Darth Maul, it's underwhelming. That's because the director doesn't know how to shoot a scene like this. That should be an epic, monumental battle. And speaking of Darth Maul, what's with the blatant Star Wars ripoffs? Stay on target! Eject! Double-bladed sword fights, taking place in a room that looked a hell of a lot like the one in Phantom Menace? And what's with Brendan Fraser's cameo? Did he ever speak more than 4 words in a row, or was he basically just grunting? Anyway, if you can ignore these quibbles, what you have here is a sci-fi action film with some cool gimmicks and is very enjoyable. The die-hard Marvel faz get a Larry Hama cameo, as well as nice touches like Breaker chewing some bubblegum and General Hawk in a wheelchair. Even Storm Shadow's fate echoes back to what happened in the Marvel series, and I can't wait to see it play out in the next movie. Even though I think Snake Eyes taking a vow of silence is beyond stupid. DVD special features are pretty scarce even on this 2-disc edition. There are no deleted scenes, so unfortunately I am certain that some sort of deluxe edition is coming. That scene from the trailer when Destro asks, "What did you say your unit was called again?" and Hawk responds, "I didn't," isn't in the movie. There are definitely scenes out there that didn't make the cut. You get the audio commentary track with the entertaining Sommers. I may not like his work, but that doesn't mean I don't like him as a person. And 2 featurettes. I think this lack of extras is a bit of a ripoff, and I could care less about the digital copy. This movie is obviously the first of a franchise. Dennis Quaid is signed to 3 films, and it really whets the appetite for the next film. There's even a cliffhanger teaser ending. You only really get to know 5 or 6 Joes, so I'm anxious to see who will depict it in the next film. My personal wish list includes Stalker, and I hope Major Blood shows up too. If you're a fan of action films and you don't care about acting or realism, you'll dig G.I. Joe. If you're a diehard like me, you'll love seeing some of the toys you owned flying around on screen. I would say that G.I. Joe was a more successful adaptation than the dreadful Transformers films. Nearly 12 years ago, I saw a movie that was based upon a popular toy franchise for the 3rd time in my life. This movie turned out to be G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra. And if I must be honest, I ended up seeing the movie under confusing circumstances. I never had any intentions of seeing G.I. Joe: Rise of the Cobra when it was first released in theaters. Let me make this perfectly clear. After the mindless action of the first 2 Transformers movies, I had vowed never to watch another action movie based upon a popular toy. In fact, I had intended to see the new comedy at the time, Julie and Julia. My family and I ended up watching G.I. Joe because I thought a relative of mine wanted to see it. As it turned out, my relative thought I wanted to see the movie, which goes to show how dangerous the lack of communications can be. We ended up watching a movie that neither of us had intended to see. Stephen Sommers, the creator of the Mummy franchise and director of the first two movies, directed this tale about the G.I. Joe team, a covert unit of International Special Forces commandos under the command of a U.S. Army general named Hawk, Dennis Quaid. Original, huh? Following an attempt by terrorists to steal nanotechnology-based warheads, two regular Army commandos, Conrad Duke Hauser and Wallace Ripcord Weems, joined the Joes in an effort to prevent the warheads from falling into the hands of terrorists. During Duke and Ripcord's training at the G.I. Joe's command center in North Africa, two terrorists named the Berenice and Storm Shadow attacked the base, and in the process managed to wound General Hawk and steal the warheads. The team eventually learned that the warhead's creator and owner of an arms manufacturing company called Mars, James McCullen, was responsible for the attack and wanted the warheads back for his own nefarious means. What can I say about G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra? It was simply your typical summer action blockbuster based upon a popular franchise, and like many of these action films, it was filled with the usual action, explosions, violence, silly one-liners, and special effects. Nothing special, nothing original. It also featured an underwater battle between the G.I. Joe team and McCullen's troops. I read somewhere that Sommers wanted to pay homage to the 1965 James Bond movie, Thunderball. Well, he certainly succeeded as far as I am concerned. Sommers' underwater battle in G.I. Joe: Rise of the Cobra seemed just as boring as the one featured in Thunderball. However, G.I. Joe turned out to be surprisingly better than I had expected. In fact, the movie possessed enough attributes for me to enjoy it. You heard right. I actually managed to enjoy G.I. Joe. Despite the usual action nonsense, the movie turned out to rather enjoyable. More importantly, screenwriters Stuart, Beattie, David Elliott, and Paul Lovett included several twists in both the plot and some of the characterizations that took me by surprise. And G.I. Joe did not strike me as the type of movie that could generate that kind of surprise. Another aspect of the movie that allowed it rise above the likes of the Transformer movies were its exploration of background stories of characters like Duke, the Baroness, McCullen, the Baroness's brother Rex Lewis, and the two former rivals, Storm Shadow and one of the Joes. The movie also featured a surprisingly effective action sequence set in Paris, a sequence that ended with some noteworthy special effects produced under the supervision of Christian Roberton and shot wonderfully by cinematographer Mitchell Amundsen. Another aspect of G.I. Joe that impressed me was its cast. Aside from one particular actor, the actors and actresses struck me as surprisingly impressive. Channing Tatum led the cast as Duke, the Army Special Forces officer who decides to join the G.I. Joe team in order to continue his assignment regarding the nanoprobe warheads. Duke is also haunted by a past tragedy that involved his former girlfriend, Anna Lewis, aka the Baroness, and her brother, Rex. In the decades since this movie's release, Tatum has managed to become a major and talented Hollywood star. But I have to be honest, he did not exactly appeal to me as a screen presence when I first saw G.I. Joe, but I thought he gave a very solid and competent performance in this film. Portraying Duke's best friend was comic actor, writer, and producer Marlon Wayans. He portrayed Ripcord, another Special Forces soldier who decides to follow Duke in joining the Joes. Ripcord also harbored a desire to be acknowledged as a top military pilot, and he fell in love with another member of the G.I. Joe team. As expected, Wayans provided a great deal of laughter in a role that could easily be labeled as comic relief. Only in this movie, Ripcord had a well-written romance and managed to save two major capital cities in the movie's finale. Wayans not only handled the comedy with great ease, he also did a solid job in his romantic and action scenes. There was one performance that failed to impress me, and it belonged to Dennis Quaid as General Hawk, leader of the G.I. Joe team. Now, I have been a fan of Quaid for years. Out of all the performances in the movie, his was the only one that turned me off. How can I put this? Quaid's General Hawk sounded and behaved like an authority figure, whether it be a police officer, politician, or military officer from a 1950s or 60s B-movie. You know, he spouted the usual flag-waving crap in an exaggerated manner that came off as stiff. I only thank God that his role was small. Before I saw G.I. Joe, I had suspected that it would become another Transformers or Transformers 2. Unlike the movies from that particular franchise, I did not have to turn off my brain to enjoy the film, and that surprised me, despite the movie's flaws. Also, Sommers did a pretty good job in directing both the cast and crew in order to create a surprisingly entertaining movie. He also had the good luck to work from a solid script that provided a few good twists and surprises. G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra is not a cinematic masterpiece, an action masterpiece, or exercise in intellectual introspection, but it must have did something right. I enjoyed the film, and it was a hit big enough to lead to a sequel some 4 years later. To examine G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra with a serious eye is a complete waste of time. It's big dumb fun. What did you expect is what the kids will say as they unknowingly insult and disparage the film in an attempt to make an excuse for its flaws. Traditionally, that excuse holds no water in the real world, but this time I will give them part one of that statement. G.I. Joe certainly is dumb, but to call it fun is a leap I'm unwilling to take. As someone that grew up playing with G.I. Joe action figures and watching the cartoon, I fully expected to enjoy this excursion into absurdity as a group of 6 of my friends and I descended upon Seattle's Cinerama Theater for a midnight showing following Paramount's barring of the critical masses. The trailers promised immense action and outlandish characters, as the title promised the rise of the terrorist organization I recognized from my childhood. I didn't care about the mythology. All I cared about was a cohesive story, a little intelligence, and a plot that made sense. Unfortunately, I got flashbacks of 8-year-old ninjas and unknown East African wars, love quadrangles, and more nanotechnology than any one person should ever have to encounter in their lifetime. While the film is absurd, it tries to be smart, and while it's trying to be smart, it's just plain embarrassing. Directed by Sommers, the Mummy franchise, G.I. Joe revolves around the story of McCullen, Christopher Eccleston, a double-crossing Scottish arms dealer and his weaponized nanotechnology, which when deployed can eat away an entire city, much like the way the CGI Gort in Fox's remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still tried last year. On the side of the good guys is the international military unit known as G.I. Joe, a unit with every technology known and unknown to man at their disposal, and we get a first-hand glimpse at all of it. Why does the team's ninja still fight with swords when they have all this technology? I have no idea, but asking questions of this crock pot of stupidity would drive you crazy, so it's best to roll with it or ignore it. I'm still trying to figure out how they managed to build a massive underwater city of metal at the North Pole, several yards beneath what they described as 10 stories of ice. Not to mention the other one beneath the Egyptian desert. If you can explain those two to me, I would be most grateful. There's no need to comment on the acting other than to say Joseph Gordon-Levitt must have had a clause in his contract granting the filmmakers only brief looks at his actual face in an attempt to hide all involvement in a picture that will do nothing for his career. Marlon Wayans was, as expected, brought on to play the role of the goofy guy, who occasionally falls down and tries to woo Scarlett, Rachel Nichols, when he isn't having to speak Celtic in order to get the guns on his CGI aircraft to work. You see, the ship was designed by a Scottish arms dealer, so Celtic voice commands only make sense. Sheesh! Popular franchise catchphrases such as Yo Joe and Half the Battle are all there in an effort to appease the target audience, and it does make reason for a laugh if that was the goal. Then again, the Hasbro logo at the beginning of the film also served as the source for laughter in my showing, so I'm not sure what any of that means. Filled with CGI and edited in such a way that you can only assume they didn't think you cared what was going on, as long as you assumed something was going on, G.I. Joe is the mess many expected it to be, but hoped it wouldn't. Not even in its sequel setup does the film deliver on its title. The trailers offer shortened versions of every battle sequence, and any resemblance to the cartoon I used to watch is non-existent. I felt there were only 2 possible ways for this film to truly break out and impress audiences. The first was to stick extraordinarily close to what the cartoon offered up and ham it up all the way, or take it deadly serious, cast someone other than a Wayans brother, and bring in an on-the-cusp director like Peter Berg to give it a shot. Instead, we get Sommers and a middle-of-the-road actioner that neither commits to its lunacy nor takes itself serious enough to appeal to any one approach by the audience. Saying it's a notch above the horrendous Van Helsing Sommers delivered in 2004 is giving it almost no credit whatsoever. G.I. Joe supremely failed to live up to my popcorn entertainment expectations, and those expectations weren't set very high. As a result, I can't help but believe Stephen Sommers' next film better be a massive hit, or he will be the one directing straight-to-DVD movies rather than producing them. This was his first directing gig in 5 years, and it certainly wasn't worth the wait. Back in March, an over-the-air TV station played G.I. Joe: Rise of Cobra. I watched it many years ago when it was brand new and in the movie theater, but rewatching it on TV made me think about it a lot. While at Walmart, I found a DVD version of the movie, as well as 2 other G.I. Joe movies that came out after Rise of Cobra. I didn't own a copy of the movie on DVD or any of the other movies in the series, so I purchased it and began to watch them. During this summer, I want to write 1 post a week about movies that remind me of summer blockbusters. This week, I had problems thinking of a movie I didn't mind reviewing in a post. I recently watched the DVD version of G.I. Joe: Rise of Cobra, so I decided to pick it for the movie to review this week. The movie has a large cast which includes Channing Tatum, Dennis Quaid, Christopher Eccleston, Marlon Wayans, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. The movie is directed by Stephen Sommers. I remember when the movie was released, as well as some of the online controversy surrounding the script that was leaked online. When I had the chance to see the movie in theaters, I liked parts of it but didn't like other parts of it. To me, the movie wasn't the worst action movie I ever saw, and didn't mind watching more than once, but it was one I wouldn't normally watch for fun because I like it that much. All these years later, I wanted to rewatch it and remember if the parts I didn't like about the movie are parts I still don't like, or if I changed my mind about it. Well, I still feel the same way about the movie as I did back then. The movie itself is very nostalgic for me because of the time period and the stories I have about going to see it with my friends. Those memories make the movie very special for me. But that doesn't mean it's the best action movie ever, or that everyone who watches the movie will actually enjoy it. The movie's plot moves very fast, and the story could be hard for people unfamiliar with the G.I. Joe toys to follow. The explanations of each character and anything else important to the plot are done quickly via character dialogue. This makes many of the characters' dialogue seem odd and lack a more natural way of communicating with one another. Since there is a lot of plot to catch the audience up on, this probably was one of the only ways for the film to explain the plot, the characters, and anything else the audience needs to know to keep up with the film. I personally don't mind this, but I believe this is because I watched the movie many times when it was released. The film's dialogue is very familiar to me and allows me to focus on other parts of the movie. For first-time viewers will have problems with the dialogue, especially when it comes to the details of the movie that make it more enjoyable to watch. The action sequences are, like the plot, fast-paced. They don't show as much blood, guts, and gore as modern-day action movies tend to, but there is enough going on that it may bother anyone with a sensitivity to blood, guts, and gore. Like with other action movies I watched over the years, there are certain action sequences I don't enjoy because of what happens in it, but there are others I'm not bothered by. Overall, the movie isn't for everyone. I know my memories and nostalgic feelings for it cloud my judgment about it, but if you are curious about it, I would recommend to watch it. If the plot or that it is a fast-paced action movie with a plot that makes sense after watching it a few times over makes you wary of it, then I'd say don't watch it. This is definitely a movie that non-action movie fans won't love at all. If you want to watch an action movie in a similar style but is easier to follow, I would recommend Marvel's Avengers, 2012. It has everything G.I. Joe: Rise of Cobra has, including a fast-paced plot and characters that explain the plot and their backstories via dialogue, but it has a much smoother, more natural-sounding dialogue, a plot that speeds up, then slows down, and as a whole much easier to follow than Rise of Cobra. It's fair to say that expectations were low for G.I. Joe. Inspired by a line of stirringly patriotic 60s action figures, produced by the mastermind behind the Transformers and Doom movies, and directed by Sommers, Van Helsing, the film promised to be the runt in 2009's blockbuster litter, which only proves that in Hollywood, as in sport and politics, lowered expectations can often be a blessing in disguise. If G.I. Joe had hit the screens last year alongside The Dark Knight and Iron Man, it might have struggled to make an impact. But coming on the heels of Wolverine and Terminator Salvation, it feels like a welcome blast of fresh air. The setup is essentially Team America played fairly straight. In the near future, a high-tech team of globe-trotting crime fighters, the best of the best from every NATO member country, are pitched against the deadly forces of Christopher Eccleston's murderous Scottish arms dealer McCullen of the clan McCullen-Natch. Our heroes include Channing Tatum's walking, brooding buzzcut Duke, Marlon Wayans in full-on goofy black sidekick mode as Ripcord, and Dennis Quaid kicking ass and taking names as Squad Commander Hawk. The plot is little more than a 12-year-old's action movie wishlist. Wiseacre heroes? Check. Foxy leather-clad babes? Check. Wholesale destruction of international landmarks? Check. Scarred uber villain with underwater base and access to world-threatening weapons technology? Check, check, and check. But it's all put together with such verve and invention that resistance becomes futile. The climactic sequence, a globe-spanning pitched battle on 5 fronts involving ninjas, nanobots, and a fighter jet that speaks Gaelic, is nothing short of breathtaking. G.I. Joe is big, dumb, loud, and utterly relentless. Basically, everything you could ever want from a summer blockbuster. G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra is a 118-minute animated film with sequences involving the faces and other body parts of human beings. It is sure to be enjoyed by those whose movie appreciation is defined by the ability to discern that moving pictures and sound are being employed to depict violence. Nevertheless, it is better than Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. The film is inspired by Hasbro's famous line of plastic action figures. The heroes are no longer exclusively Americans, but a multinational elite strike force from many nations, which provides Paramount the opportunity to give top billing to an actor named Adewale Akinnuoye-Agbaje. And to think there was a time when Maurice Micklewhite was not considered a good name for a star. At last, Hollywood allows actors to possess their real names. The Joes, as they are called, are needed to counter nanomites, a secret weapon that eats up people and buildings and stuff. This weapon has been invented by the evil disfigured scientist named McCullen, Christopher Eccleston, who steals it back from the people he sold it to and plans to use it to conquer the world. Why is McCullen so pissed off? His Scottish clan was insulted centuries ago. Those Scots. His conquest plans are not sophisticated. He launches 4 nano-missiles at world capitals. 2 of them are Moscow and Washington. The third one is destroyed, and if I'm not mistaken, the 4th one is forgotten by the plot and is still up there somewhere. But that's the kind of detail I tend to get wrong, because that's more fun than getting it right. How fast are these missiles? They rocket into space and zoom down to Earth. A Joe named Ripcord, Marlon Wayans, commandeers the enemy's rocket airplane and, even though he's never seen it before, flies it so well that he catches up to the Moscow missile and destroys it, and then he turns around and flies halfway around the globe to chase up with the missile headed for Washington. He uses verbal commands to fire his air-to-air weapons after a fellow Joe named Scarlett, Rachel Nichols, intuits that McCullen would have programmed his plane to respond to Celtic, which, luckily, she happens to speak. These plot details are not developed at great depth because the movie is preoccupied with providing incomprehensible wall-to-wall computer-generated special effects. I should have been carrying a little clicker to keep count, but I believe that director Stephen Sommers has more explosions in his movie than Michael Bay had in Transformers 2 only last month. World records don't last long these days. What is Cobra? What nationality are its leaders, other than Scottish? What will it gain by destroying world capitals? Reader, I do not know. Even the U.S. President, Jonathan Pryce, asks incredulously, don't they have any demands? His role is otherwise limited to being briefed about the Joes. Cobra has a woman named the Baroness, Sienna Miller, to match Scarlett of the Joes. These women are interesting. They have leather fetish wear and are seductively made up, but are otherwise honorary boys because us Joe fans don't like to watch a lot of spit swapping. But because us fans liked the two jive-talking robots in Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen, G.I. Joe gives us Ripcord, Marlon Wayans, who is comic relief, says black stuff, and can't control his high-tech armored suit, so he runs into things. We guess he's a contrast to the calm macho heroism of Adewale Akinnuoye-Agbaje. The two teams also each have a skilled ninja fighter from Japan. Why is this, you might ask? Because Japan is a huge market for CGI animation and video games, that's why. It also has a sequence set in the Egyptian desert, although there are no shots of dead robots or topless pyramids, and Cobra headquarters are buried within the miles-deep ice of Arctic. You think construction costs are high here. At one point, the ice cap is exploded real good, so it will sink and crush the G.I. Joe's submarine. We thought ice floated in water, but no, you can see big falling ice chunks real good here. It must be only in your Coke that it floats. There is never any clear sense in the action of where anything is in relation to anything else. You get more of a binary action strategy. You see something, it fires. You see something else, it gets hit. Using the power of logic, you deduce that the first thing was aiming at the second thing. Yet I say this movie is certainly better than Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. How so? Admittedly, it doesn't have as much cleavage, but the high-tech hardware is more fun to look at than the transforming robots. The plot is as preposterous, and although the noise is just as loud, it's more the deep bass rumbles of explosions than the ear-piercing bang of steel robots pounding on each other. Like they all have some sort of battle-born neurological disorder. A stunningly brutal fight between 12-year-old versions of Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow also is a put place to bring up how stupendously violent the film is, with the film casually dealing out its massively callous body count with reckless abandon. Bodies melt, heads explode. At one point, some dude gets impaled by a forklift truck, and more background actors fall before various ninja weaponry than you'd think possible with a PG-13 rating. The characterizations are, obviously, cartoon level, which is fitting despite how bewilderingly awful they all are, but even with this in mind, your sense is real at some of the concentrated dumb that vomits from the mouths of the established cast. To say that the dialogue is next-level hyperbolic claptrap is a stunning understatement, with Sommers' script dropping frequent clangers that established actors struggle to vocalize while barely keeping a straight face. Technically, we don't exist. Proudly booms Dennis Quaid's hawk, blissfully unaware that the term he's looking for is officially, and that to technically not exist pretty much means they actually don't exist. Such a blooper would almost be forgivable, but the Sam line showed up in the damn trailer, for God's sake. As the script struggles to keep all of its players in order, an early scene showing the all-of-villainous cast communicating using more holograms than a posthumous Michael Jackson gig, it allows for huge amounts of guffaw-inducing plot holes to parade around in front of your disbelieving eyeballs. Would you really keep a water tank for practicing undersea battle training that contains billion gallons of H2O 2 floors above the living quarters? Why the hell would you program a fighter jet's weapon system to not only be voice-activated, but to be in Celtic? We get it, Sommers. You've kept Destro Scottish. And why is the movie subtitled The Rise of Cobra, when with its huge undersea base, populated with hundreds of guards, the terrorist organization already seems pretty solidly established? The plot, such as it is obsessed with nanomites, that go-to MacGuffin that's be used to explain away any plot wrinkles in any movie made over the last 20 years. But here the tech might as well be fucking witchcraft, as the little robot bastards can seem to be able to do anything the story requires, which includes such diverse traits as being able to dissolve the Eiffel Tower, mind control, the ability to alter flesh into living metal. Even by the questionably standards laid down by a movie based on an 80s toy line, it's impressively lazy bollocks, which manages to make the multi-purpose Allspark cube from Transformers seem like the Maltese Falcon of plot devices. Struggling to make themselves heard over the roaring of CGI vehicles and a metric ton of explosion, most of the cast managed to actually get the tone the film is wildly shooting for. It is based on an animated toy advert, after all, although the presence of Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Jonathan Pryce as the American president still baffles me to this day. However, the film just can't escape that lead character. Duke is obviously a massive prick, something that isn't helped by the fact that Channing Tatum simply doesn't want to be there, a fact that is marked by the disdain etched on every square inch on his face. His snobbishness concerning a film that's paying him to be a hero would be more understandable if he was being treated badly by the script. Rachel Nichols, Scarlett may be smart and tough, but still has a whole scene where she is required to hold a conversation while jogging on a running machine in a tank top. But as it stands, he seems to be the only one who doesn't seem to be getting the joke. And yet, seemingly against all the odds, G.I. Joe Troc finally achieves a level of idiotic nirvana with a mid-film chase sequence that bulleyes a ludicrous sweet spot as Duke and Ripcord, both clad in RoboCop-style suits that let them sprint through walls like Usain Bolt had an illegitimate child after a fucking tank. As the main players literally rip the streets of Paris, a brand new shit shoot with a shocking disregard for the safety of anyone in the vicinity. Duke fires a missile directly at the Baroness's getaway vehicle, even though Snake Eyes is still frantically clinging to the underside. And the sequence ends doubtlessly with a huge amount of collateral damage, dozens of motorists dead, which no one suspiciously mentions, and with the Eiffel Tower taking an early bath in the Seine. It's laughably ridiculous 4-star scene in a 2-star movie, and by completely bloody awesome, manages to bring up the average for the entire movie. Similarly, despite large changes to the source material, my knowledge of Joe lore mostly comes from Marvel's late 80s comics run. The B-plot animosity between the movie's dueling ninjas is nicely carried out, thanks to the numerous twirling attacks from Byung-Hun Lee and Ray Park. Although, whomever decided that Snake Eyes should have creepy, visible, gimp suit-style lips should be given 20 lashes. I'll start right off by saying that G.I. Joe Rise of the Cobra is what the Transformers franchise should be. Following months of trailers and clips that, frankly, made this movie look like it was going to be awful, imagine my surprise when I actually ended up enjoying it. I don't recall ever seeing a marketing campaign that so made me not want to see a movie that turned out to be decent. G.I. Joe starts out unexpectedly centuries ago with a man named McCullen about to be punished for some heinous crime. He goes on about how his ancestors will avenge him and whatnot, and it's pretty overdramatic. From this scene, I wasn't really sure what to expect as far as the tone of the film. From there, it jumps to not too far in the future, and we see Christopher Eccleston giving a commanding presentation to the heads of NATO. He's converted nanotechnology developed to help save lives into a weapon. In missile form, it can disintegrate anything it touches within seconds and will keep on devouring everything in its path until it is deactivated. It is a formidable weapon. A purchase is made and an elite team of soldiers, which includes Duke, Channing Tatum, and Ripcord, Marlon Wayans, is tasked with delivering 4 of these small projectiles to some location. Of course, they never make it there. On the way, the first battle action sequence of the movie takes place, and it was pretty impressive. We get our first look at future tech with the ship the bad guys used to attack the convoy. Up until this point, the film actually looks like your standard, straight-up action film. That is superseded by the more cartoony aspect when that ship lands, and the Baroness, Sienna Miller, and a bunch of armored, silver-masked antagonists come out and start shooting up the place with cool beam weapons. It turns out there is history between Duke and the Baroness, causing the mission to go awry. This event also leads to Duke and Ripcord being taken to G.I. Joe headquarters, invited by General Hawk, Dennis Quaid. We see the massive Joe headquarters, and soon our boys are put through training and become a part of the team. Along the way, we meet Snake Eyes, Ray Park, and brainy Scarlett O'Hara, Rachel Nichols. Of course, the bad guys want to acquire the nanomissiles, and the plot revolves around their acquisition and the how and why of their use in the goal of, naturally, world domination. Now, we've been talking about G.I. Joe here for months, and not exactly in a positive light. Frankly, the footage shown has made the film look awful in that cheesy Transformers kind of way. Well, I'm here to tell you that no one is more surprised than me that I actually thought it was pretty good. Maybe even more than just pretty good. Don't get me wrong, it's good, but summer action movie good, so keep that in mind. One of the screenwriters, Stuart Beattie, co-wrote all 3 Pirates of the Caribbean movies and 30 Days of Night. How's that for variety? And director Sommers brought us The Mummy Returns, and Van Helsing. But don't hold that one against him. What was good? Every damned scene with Snake Eyes in it, for one thing. Ray Park rocked as the mute character, who left me wondering how he could breathe with that face mask on. The sword fight scenes were fantastic, and I loved that he wasn't strict about only using martial arts weapons. He did not hesitate to pull out a gun if he deemed it the most effective weapon of the moment. My first reaction to the accelerator suits in the trailer was an eye roll, but they turned out to be one of the coolest things in the movie. They were used in a Paris car chase sequence that was awesome and included Scarlett doing some wild motorcycle riding through Paris traffic, in addition to Duke and Ripcord tearing through streets chasing the bad guys. Another thing that was unexpected was the inclusion of serious scenes in the film. In particular, a flashback to Duke in the Middle East in a war zone and him at a military funeral afterwards almost seemed like they came out of a dramatic film. Actually, the overall tone of the film was that they approached it fairly straight-faced. There wasn't much of the feeling that director Sommers was actively trying to make this a movie based on a toy. Animated series and comic book, the film took itself fairly seriously, and that worked. Oh, and there was a little unexpected cameo by an actor who is usually pretty goofy in films but wasn't here, and I enjoyed seeing him this way. Finally, I liked the fact that there was humor in the film, but it was, with 1 or 2 exceptions, very deftly done. Not like the yuck-yuck-in-your-face Transformers humor. It was here and there, but didn't seem inserted just because, hey, we need a big laugh here. Oh, and there were nods to the original toy ads, mentioning lifelike hair and kung fu grip. What wasn't so great? Well, not much really. Despite the movie taking itself seriously overall, there was enough in the film to remind you that it was indeed a summer action flick based on a toy. The Baroness in the Arctic Circle with a coat open to expose her deep cleavage, the Doctor speaking in an over-the-top, gravelly, melodramatic voice, and a few other bits like that. I also felt the movie ran a little long and could have been trimmed down by 15 minutes or so. The movie is rated PG-13 for action violence and a few scenes of burned, deformed faces, but unlike Transformers 2, there was very little foul language or sexual references. If you bring your 10-year-old to this, you won't be squirming in your seat, but you might have them look away at some of the facial stuff. As to the whole G.I. Joe isn't American in the movie issue, it really wasn't one. The movie opens with regular Army soldiers, and a couple of them end up on the team in pivotal roles. Tempest in a teacup is what that turned out to be, as far as I'm concerned. So, if you're looking for a final action movie this summer that you can bring the kids to, I would recommend G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra. Nichols can't redeem that plot arc, and that's only arc that comes within hailing distance of interesting. The tread of making movies based on popular toy properties would never stop, regardless of how it'll turn out in the end, though there's a possibility to gain a new and refreshing audience to get on board, just like those who grew up with them in the 80s or 99s. But if any one of us thought the $175 million adaptation of G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra would save the drought of the summer movie season of 2009, maybe it's best to look somewhere else. What's the story armed with the latest in military and spy technology? The team of elite soldiers known as G.I. Joe travel around the globe to wherever their services are needed in their latest assignment. General Hawk, Dennis Quaid, Duke Channing Tatum, and the rest of the G.I. Joe team take on Destro Christopher Eklund, a corrupt arms dealer, and fight the growing threat of the mysterious Cobra organization. Anybody who was obsessed with all things action when they were a kid must have been in love with G.I. Joe, a real American hero, when talking about the collection of action figures, the television series of the same name. Airing on Saturday mornings or the Marvel Comics that knows how to put the K in American, it had never associated me. With them, talks about making the movie come to life came about for years with fresh ideas in hand, and it was Transformers' success at the box office that Hasbro pushed this reality forward. But one question has to be answered. Was anyone looking forward to this just from rewatching the trailers? I wouldn't be shocked if the level of interest went down when thinking, this looks like nothing that came to mind. Even when I was 13 years old, I didn't care too much about it. Thought it was all right when I saw it opening weekend. Now, watching it for the first time in 12 years, I thought about turning it off because Holy Pork Chop Sandwich's G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra is one gigantic mess that shouldn't have its defenders. To be clear, I wasn't expecting high art when all I can do is go up after the studio made us all feel disgusted after watching Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. All I wanted was to experience is a fun and adventurous movie with some familiar characters. But it was like this was destined for teenage boys who went into this not expecting to be bored with a lot of stuff going about. Director Stephen Sommers, the Mummy Van Hing, clearly wasn't a fan of the property, so he and his trio of writers, including Stuart, collateral through these characters with an over-the-top action movie that doesn't even try to be like a G. Joe movie. Even I knew little before walking in, and I felt they explored the lure insultingly and more it convoluted and cartoony. Does Sommers offer some goofiness aspects that made the cartoon and toys ridiculous somewhat? But it could have been cooler, that's all. Asking it was like it briefly inspired him to be like Michael Bay and determined to make a G. Joe movie that doesn't take itself seriously. You can see where he thought to take all the joy out and deliver a piece of trash. Entertainment that will have people leave the heart or watch something else. But if you thought the directing was lousy, ask yourself why none of the acting has improved in its 2-hour runtime besides the fact I gave little chance to care for any of them. I'm baffled by how mediocre everyone was, despite knowing it wasn't going for Oscars. Channing Tatum as Duke was the blandest performance I've seen from him. And this was way back when I thought he couldn't act in anything worth his time or just wasn't buying. He was this cool soldier Marlon Wayne as Ripcord. Wasn't the smartest move to have a comedic actor into an action movie since he was unbearable. And then you have Sienna Miller and Christopher Eccleston as the villains, the Baroness and Destro respectively, which I couldn't stand any scene with them when it's so wooden. And unbelievable other performances from Rachel Nichols as Scarlett Dennis, Quaid as General Hawk, and even freaking Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Why didn't have to be here? The only cool character was the silent ninja Snake Eyes Ray Park, because he didn't have to say anything also. I'm still confused why Brendan Fraser made an uncredited cameo for a minute. As someone who loves his fair share of action, I honestly found it to be unengaging and derivative. Whenever there's anything relentless happening in front of me, not being invested, if someone gets hurt is one thing, but it doesn't help when it's directed so poorly. Just the set piece in Paris, where Duke and Ripcord are in these stupid accelerator suits in hopes to capture, the Baroness was so cheesy and the CGI was laughable in some places. The destruction of the Eiffel Tower wasn't too bad, though it didn't even try to improve into the third act, where one location takes place underwater, which was already too little too late, when I wanted it to be over with ASAP. Most won't care if fans are angry with how they butchered the source material, but they have the right to, since it was difficult coming up with a story revolving around the Joes versus Cobra with bigger stakes. But was there any way of getting a better script, because I found the writing to be absolutely horrible. Most of the dialogue said by these actors was embarrassing when it consists of bad jokes, dumb one-liners, and forced catchphrases only fans will know by heart. I even unintentionally laughed during the ambush sequence early on, when the helicopter pilot said, "Oh my God," he said, "is he's about to get blown up." It's even worse when they have a romantic past between Duke and the Baress. That's a way of change that won't suit well, or including having flashbacks of them, or with Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. Hunley showing why the latter is such a baby. Something tells me Paramount was worried since they held off screenings before the release. And it was no surprise it didn't get the best reviews from critics, although it made $150 million. One of my favorite reviews of this was the Schmoes No. And even though it's not in their channel anymore, the reaction to Mark Ellis saying Tatum's performance was the worst leading performance was priceless, and I don't think he finished it. Joe the Rise of Cobra was so bad, Tatum and Eklund themselves hated working on it years later, with the former saying it was part of a picture deal with the studio. Can you blame him on the award side? It was nominated for 6 Razzies, including Worst Picture Director, and Sienna Miller won for Worst Supporting Actress G.I. Joe. The Rise of Cobra is an insult to all the fans of the popular IP when everything about this live-action adaptation cannot be an exciting action movie it desperately tried to be. Especially with its poor performances and horrendous writing, it's not the dumb fun that's describing itself as a guilty pleasure. It's just terrible. I can't say it was a surprise the studio released 2 of the worst movies that year. Now you know, and knowing keeps you from staying away. Extra information when enjoying/enduring the delights of a big-budget summer flick, it often helps to deploy something that I call the inner 12-year-old, an invaluable tool that allows you to connect with a more innocent part of yourself that has no interest in such things as logic or plot holes big enough to lose an experimental jet through. It's especially handy considering that the vast majority of Hollywood's output during the silly season is hardly of a consistent quality. But surely no other director has required the usage of this talent than him. Stephen Sommers, the director responsible for the first 2 Mummy movies and the reprehensible Van Hing with G. Joe A. live-action version of the popular 80s toy line, he seemed to have found a perfect outlet for his particular aptitude for making very noisy, very violent movies, almost exclusively for preteens, with the film Noticeably. Stocking up on all explosions, ninjas, and cleavage a child colliding with puberty could possibly want. Knows Jarhead Duke is a soldier, a warrior who makes sure the job gets done no matter what. But when his unit is ambushed by a terrorist organization with far superior tech looking to steal prototype nanotechnology missiles, he and his wisecracking buddy Rip Cord are bailed out by G.I. Joe, a clandestine international freedom force populated by rubber-clad ass-kickers who only answer to silly code names such as Busty Crossbow Expert Scarlet and devastatingly cool Griff C. Ninja Snake Eyes asked to join their elite fighting team. Think a less subtle Team America. Duke and Ripcord are taken to the pit, the Joe's massive underground secret hideout, which single-handedly explains where all of our tax goes as Duke and Ripcord train the evil forces of Cobra Pool, their resources under the command of corrupt arms dealer James McCullen and their agents, the Slinky, Baroness Master of Disguise Zartan, and the snowy-clad Storm Shadow White Shirley, a fashion F-par, whether it's after Labor Day or not, begin to make their move on a master plan that isn't really all that clear. What is clear is that a lot of the combatants on both sides have long and bitter history with each other. That makes a Spanish telenova seem like Game of Thrones. Duke and Baroness used to date and both have a hidden connection to MC Cullen's sinister disfigured science guy, whereas Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow have been feuding since childhood, and soon all this bad blood spills out into an explodey congregation under the snow wastes of the Arctic that will eventually give birth to the metal-headed Destro and the Darth Vader larynx. Cobra Commander, by reading the above synopsis, it should come as no surprise that G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra is an infantile piece of, and yet I've always found this movie hugely endearing and surprising fun, thanks to how stunningly lacking in self-awareness it is. Very early on, we get a handle on how little grasp the film seems to have on the trajectory of its own story, losing control of it almost instantly. With a nonsensical prologue set in 1641 that sets up Destro's ancestors for some reason, the film is utterly rotten, with flashbacks that strain to prop up the mountainous backstory, with practically everyone pausing in thought at some point in the film to allow a memory integral to the plot to kick in, like they all have some sort of battle-born neurological disorder. A stunningly brutal fight between 12-year-old versions of Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow also is a put place to bring up how stupendously violent the film is, with the film casually dealing out its massively callous body count with reckless abandon. Bodies melt, heads explode. At one point, some dude gets impaled by a forklift truck, and more background actors fall before various ninja weaponry than you'd think possible. With a PG-13 rating, the characterizations are obviously cartoon level, which is fitting despite how bewilderingly awful they all are. But even with this in mind, your sense is real. At some of the concentrated dumb that vomits from the mouths of the established cast, to say that the dialogue is next-level hyperbolic claptrap is a stunning understatement, with Sommers' script dropping frequent clangers that established actors struggle to vocalize while barely keeping a straight face. Technically, we don't exist, proudly. Booms, Dennis Quaid's hawk blissfully unaware that the term he's looking for is officially, and that to technically not exist pretty much means they actually don't exist. Such a blooper would almost be forgivable. But the Sam line showed up in the damn trailer, for God's sake, as the script struggles to keep all of its players in. Order an early scene showing the all-of-villainous cast communicating, using more holograms that apostle Michael Jackson gig. It allows for huge amounts of GAA-inducing plot holes to parade around in front of your disbelieving eyeballs. Would you really keep a water tank for practicing under a battle training that contains billion gallons of H2O2 floors above the living quarters? Why the hell would you program a fighter jet's weapon system to not only be voice-activated, but to be in Celtic? We get it. Sommers, you've kept Destro Scottish, and why is the movie subtitled The Rise of Cobra, when with its huge undersea base, populated with hundreds of guards, the terrorist organization already seems pretty solidly established? The plot, such as it is obsessed with nanomites that go to MacGuffin, that's be used to explain away any plot wrinkles in any movie made over the last 20 years. But here the tech might as well be witchcraft, as the little robot bastards can seem to be able to do anything the story requires, which includes such diverse traits as being able to dissolve the Eiffel Tower, mind control the ability to alter flesh into living metal, even by the questionably standards laid down by a movie based on an 80s toy line. It's impressively lazy bollocks, which manages to make the multi-purpose Allspark cube from Transformers seem like the MI's Falcon of plot devices struggling to make themselves heard over the roaring of CGI vehicles and a metric ton of explosion. Most of the cast managed to actually get the tone the film is wildly shooting for. It is based on an animated toy advert, after all. Although the presence of Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Jonathan Pryce as the American president still baffles, film just can't escape that lead character. Duke is obviously a massive prick, something that isn't helped by the fact that Channing Tatum simply doesn't want to be there. A fact that is marked by the disdain etched on every square inch on his face. His snobbishness concerning a film that's paying him to be a hero would be more understandable if he was being treated badly by the script. Rachel Nichols, Scarlett, may be smart and tough, but still has a whole scene where she is required to hold a conversation while jogging on a running machine in a tank top. But as it stands, he seems to be the only one who doesn't seem to be getting the joke, and yet seemingly against all the odds, G.I. Joe finally achieves a level of idiotic nirvana with a mid-film chase sequence that bully as a ludicrous sweet. Spot as Duke and Ripcord, both clad in RoboCop-style suits that let them sprint through walls like Usain Bolt had an illegitimate child after a tank, as the main players literally eye the streets of Paris. A brand new shoot, with a shocking disregard for the safety of anyone in the vicinity. Duke fires a missile directly at the Baroness Getaway vehicle, even though Snake Eyes is still frantically clinging to the underside, and the sequence ends doubtlessly with a huge amount of collateral damage, dozens of motorists dead, which no one suspiciously mentions. And with the Eiffel Tower taking an early bath in the sun, it's laughably ridiculous. 4-star. Seen in a Twar movie, and by completely bloody awesome manages to bring up the average for the entire movie similarly. Despite large changes to the source material, my knowledge of Joe lore mostly comes from Marvel's late 80s comics run. The plot animosity between the movie's dueling ninjas is nicely carried out, thanks to the numerous twirling attacks. From Byung-Hun Lee and Ray Park, although whomever decided that Snake Eyes should have creepy visible suit-style lips should be given 20 lashes. Joe, The Rise of Cobra is not a great movie. It's not even a good movie, but we need a different set of aesthetic criteria to judge it as a film. It's a failure. But as a 2-hour live-action Saturday morning cartoon, it's wildly successful. It's a double-fisted shot of over-the-top performances and flashback-based character development with a healthy chaser of sexual tension, Clearly, this isn't Star Trek caliber science fiction. Joe isn't out to challenge any of our preconceived notions or accepted moras. This is decidedly in the America kicks evil's ass category, but playing on the status quo is really just a stepping stone to its ultimate goal, entertainment. The plot is your fairly typical battle between good and evil. The G.I. Joes and a malevolent group centered around a disfigured mad scientist known only as the Doctor battle for control of M-Inc.'s newest and most deadly weaponry, nanomites. These microscopic critters will eat anything made of metal until they're sent a stop signal. But unbeknownst to NATO, who funded this technology, they can also heal wounds, change a human's behavior patterns, erase memories, and even alter someone's physical appearance. Did someone say? Indestructible army of evil automatons, though, were launched into the battle with only a modicum of preparation. The film threads a series of flashbacks into the narrative to develop characters and elucidate motivations. These interludes are the film's greatest strength, illuminating a surprising array of interrelationships between the Joes and their evil counterparts, ranging anywhere from classic sibling rivalry to love spurned to historical inevitability. The plot isn't necessarily classical. The writers certainly drew on some of the more enterprising elements of the light Saturday morning cartoon fare. When developing their narrative arc, the performances are intentionally laughable and one-dimensional, but with names like Snake Eyes Dr. Mindbender and Cobra Commander, how could they not be? Only Channing Tatum playing the lead as Duke seems to have missed the joke, but even that works in the film's favor, giving it some so bad it's good flair when I wasn't caught up in one of the crisp action sequences or distracted by the exaggerated catwalk of the Baroness Sienna Miller. I delightedly marveled at Tatum's theatrical ineptitude, and though I can't reveal the actor's name without giving away an essential plot twist, the evil doctor's calculating tone and jerky mannerisms yielded the most satisfying caricature in the film. The overlong running time and the limited repertoire. Complaints during their inevitable but nonetheless enjoyable courting ritual. Riptide Marlin, Wayne, and Scarlett, the innocently beautiful Rachel Nichols, steal most of the film's stimulating banter, leaving the rest of the cast with little more than Turon liners like, "Oh my God, and now you die." Perhaps that's only fitting for a film made in association with a toy company, but hopefully the producers will correct this shortcoming before rolling out a sequel. This film, directed by Stephen Sommers, screenplay by Stuart Bay, David Elliott, Paul Lovett, story by Michael Beat Gordon, Stuart Bay, Stephen Sommers, produced by Lorenzo D. Bonaventura, Brian Goldner, Bob Diu, starring Adewal, Akinnuoye-Agbaje, Christopher Eckel, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Lee Boone Sienna, Miller, Rachel Nichols, Jonathan Price, S.E. Tagoe, Channing Tatum, Marlon Wayne Dennis, Quaid cinematography, Mitchell Amundsen, edited by Bob Ducsay, music by Alan Silvestri, production Opie's Spyglass Entertainment, D. Bonaventura Pictures. Distributed by Paramount Pictures. Release dates July 31st, 2009 in Andrews Air Force Base, August 7th, 2009 in United States. Running time 118 minutes. Country: United States language. English budget $175 million. Box office $32.5 million. So guys, this is the review of G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra movie, and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.